Why did Japan attack Pearl Harbor? Although most Americans know about Pearl Harbor, many are unaware about the events leading up to it. Japan was trying to set up an empire throughout Asia, but its violence pushed America to interfere, forcing the empire to take action against us, the US. Japan had begun to create a massive empire that spread across the South Asia, putting it in competition with the United States. And also, as the Japanese empire grew increasingly brutal, America distanced itself, and Japan believed that they needed to push the US out of the US Navy out of the Pacific. Point 1. Japan had begun to create a massive empire that spread across Southeast Asia, putting it in competition with the US. Before a bunch of this stuff happened, Japan realized that the external influence and shunned foreigners. Meanwhile, it adopted its Western technology, also which resulted in wealth, allowing to become a very powerful empire. And Japan struggled to maintain power and became brutal, and many nations cut ties with Japan because of this response. After 1868, the leader of Mei, Japan tried to improve the world strands and abolish unequal treaties imposed by European powers. Japan tried to preserve independence in the behavior that followed. In the first year of Meiji period, which many of Japan's leaders advocated in an invasion of Korea for two reasons: to combat Chinese and European takeover, and give the samurais a very important mission because they were getting so wanting to do stuff. The war was postponed until Japan had better weapons, and to grow the empire, Japan fought the Lakigads and the Ryukyus and won by a lot. They decided to fight Korea and also won a lot and made a ton of money from that. Britain sold opium for tea to China, and China didn't like it. So Britain made a deal with Japan for fighting against China. Japan is more powerful and proved it in the Russo-Japanese War for practical reasons. Japan had lots of raw valuable materials, and they wanted to ensure that they would not lose it. When the emperor had died in 1912, the Japanese felt at a loss. He reaped all the success, and the normal people came to pay respects. The general Nogi and his wife killed themselves, which were very admired by the people. After the death, many people started following the old traditional ways and realizing its importance. As General Nogi said, that they were, quote, following their lord. Point 2. As the Japanese empire grew increasingly brutal, America distanced itself. One of these examples is the Nanking Massacre. In late 1937, over a period of 6 weeks, the Japanese armies murdered hundreds of thousands of civilians. The story goes, a Japanese soldier walked into a family's house, and the family was very hospitable, giving them candies and being very nice to them, and he, quote, "Then the devil picked up a knife and stabbed my aunt, piercing her 6 times in the thigh," end quote. By Chen Deschar. They ended up witnessing their aunt's death and fuel to Japan Act label, which was as the moral embargo. He now felt Franklin Roosevelt set people cannot ship airplane parts or fuel to Japan. This act was labeled as the moral embargo, and he felt that war was now inevitable. Point 3. Japan believed that they needed to put the US Navy out of the Pacific. When Japan invaded Indonesia, they captured thousands of Dutch immigrants and put them in concentration camps. They were treated horribly, separated from their families. They were digging graves, etc. After seizing oil in the Dutch Indies, Japan had to make sure America couldn't send out its navy to try to take back new oil-rich conquests. So it became obvious So it became obvious that they would have to sink the Navy before it left the port. That Navy was docked at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. A quote by Mei Tung Moi says, quote, "The Japanese forced Indonesia and Dutch out of their homes and into makeshift internment camps." So, although most Americans know about Pearl Harbor, many are not aware of the events leading up to it. Japan was trying to set up an empire throughout Asia, but its violence pushed America to intervene, forcing the empire to take action against the U.S. Japan had begun to create a massive empire that spread across Southeast Asia, putting it in competition with the U.S. And as the Japanese empire increasingly brutal, America distanced itself. And the Japanese believed that they needed to push the U.S. Navy out of the Pacific. Thank you.